Welcome to this week's asynchronous course content. This week, we're going to start doing our deep dive into explicit instruction. And we're going to start focusing on the opening, which you all already have some experience with. That's why I do the opening, is because now it's going to be much easier for you to understand and connect with that because you have prior knowledge and you'll be able to make those connections. So, we're going to talk about the components of an opening, and then we're going to start talking about the body portion of an explicit instruction lesson by doing a deep dive into the I do or the modeling portion. So let's start with our opening. As you know, you're always going to have an attention getter, and so we're going to do a different one each week. And the attention getter for this week is one that you would use if your students were engaged in an activity and you want them to stop that activity. It could be because you need to give directions. It may be time to stop because you're going to move to another activity. And so again, I'm going to use the direction of pencils down, but for you, it might be close computers, it might be put your supplies away. Make that specific to what you're doing. So the attention getter for this week is something like pencils down, and then you wait on your students. Remember, you're scanning, wait on everybody to have their pencils down, and then you say, eyes on me. And again, scanning to make sure everyone's eyes are on you before you begin instruction, give directions, or anything like that. Now, make sure that after you give those directions, you use that attention getter and you have your students' attention. You want to make sure that you are reinforcing those appropriate readiness skills. And so you want to say something like, oh, wow, you all did great. I love the fact that everybody's pencils were down the first time I said it. And look, everybody's eyes are on me right now, so I know we're all ready to learn. Let's get started. So remember that whatever behavior you reinforce, and we want to positively reinforce those appropriate behaviors, you are increasing the likelihood that those behaviors will reoccur in the future. All right, everybody wants to know what they're going to be learning, so let's look at our objectives, which would be the next part of your opening. So our objectives for this week, what I want you to be able to do by the end of this week is to identify the characteristics of explicit instruction, and very specifically in the opening and the I do modeling portion of the body. I want you to be able to state, what are the purpose of those? Why do we use an opening? What is the purpose of the I do modeling section of explicit instruction? I want you to be able to analyze lesson plans, look at a lesson plan, and be able to identify those structures, the components within an opening, the components and the structure of the I do modeling section of explicit instruction. And then finally, this week, I want you to be able to walk away and feel pretty comfortable writing a condition for an IEP goal or objective. All right, why is this important to you? What is its relevance? Well, the majority of lessons, as I've said, in your program and when you are a teacher will be explicit instruction lessons, although not every one of those. So for those of you who are in the complex support needs emphasis, you'll learn that sometimes we don't use explicit instruction, but most often we will. And so every time you use an explicit instruction lesson, or really any lesson, you're going to have some kind of an opening. And then very frequently, the majority of the lessons, you're going to have some form of modeling, but those are critical and essential components of explicit instruction. Not only that, you're going to be writing those conditions and IEPs and objectives throughout your career and in your program. So during class, we'll do our review. Remember, we don't do the review through the video because it is an interactive activity, but we're going to do a review of evidence-based practices, high leverage practices, and then talk some more and dive in and see what do you remember about explicit instruction. And then we'll go over and do a quick review of what we've learned previously about conditions for IEP goals. So what are you going to do? What are we going to be doing this week? Well, again, we're going to be talking about the opening. We're going to be talking about the body. So you're actually going to look at some IEPs. This is part of that analyzing. You're going to practice it because remember, repeated practice, more opportunities students have with the content and the skill increases their acquisition, their retention, that maintenance and generalization. So what we're going to have you do is to look and analyze opening portion of an explicit instruction lesson plan. You're going to get the opportunity to practice writing an explicit instruction opening, and then you are going to be paired with a partner because you'll have a project coming up, and that is writing an opening. We're going to do the same type of thing with the I do portion of the body. And again, you're going to be looking at them, and you have a project coming up in which, with a partner, you will be writing the I do section of a lesson plan. So, why is this? How does this align with your IDEA goals? And remember, that's what you want. We want you to be able to look at and assess and walk away with. Is we're still working on getting that basic understanding of explicit instruction and IEP goals. And you are really this week beginning to develop those specific skills and competencies because you are going to be writing the conditions. You are going to be writing an opening in the I do section of the body. So, right there, you are developing because you're actually doing it in class. All right, let's keep going. So, you've seen this before. You're going to see it over and over again. And the reason that I'm going over this with you is because I want to make sure that you have this and this is solid by the end of the semester. The more exposure you have, the more practice. Remember, we're going to increase your acquisition and your retention. And this is absolutely on the final. So, go ahead and make sure you start practicing with it now. So when we're planning an effective lesson, effective instruction, we're always going to make sure that we start with those standards. We start with those standards. We look at our standards. We analyze them. And what we really do in the end is that we select the standards that we're going to be addressing. And with a standard, remember, we may not be teaching that whole standard. We may just be teaching a portion of that. After you know what you're going to teach, well, before we can plan any instruction, I need to do an assessment. And I need to do that assessment because I need to know what my students know now. What do they know now? Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to build on what their present level of performance or knowledge is. I'm going to build on that with the next lesson. So I'm going to assess their skills, and then I'm going to analyze those results. And whatever comes out of those results is what I'm going to use to drive my instruction. We call that informing our instruction. So now that I know what standard I'm going to be teaching, I've looked at my assessment, I know where my students are. Now I'm going to write those goals. I'm going to look at the IEP, see where is their alignment, or you know what, I'm getting ready to write the IEP and I need some goals, and I'm going to pull those goals for the standards. So you're going to write your goals, and then you're going to break those goals into smaller objectives. Remember, the goals are very broad. We want to break those into smaller, manageable, teachable steps, and those are our objectives. Always, 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 we are progress monitoring. That is a part of what you will do every single day. Throughout the day is progress monitor your students. But before you can progress monitor, you got to either select a tool that's going to measure the skill or the behavior that you're teaching, or you're going to actually need to develop it yourself. So once when you're thinking about progress monitoring, either select or develop that measure. And then after you know what the measure is, you're going to have to make a decision of what is my assessment schedule going to be. Because remember, we're progress monitoring over time consistently on a schedule. So an example of progress monitoring might be that the tool I'm going to use is a weekly spelling test that is teacher created. And I should have said the tool is a teacher-made spelling test, and my schedule is weekly. How am I going to progress monitor? I'm going to progress monitor through a spelling test that I conduct weekly. All right, now that I know all of that, I've got my standard, I'm ready, I've assessed my students. Now we're ready to, and how I'm going to progress monitor what our goals are. Now I'm ready to start planning my instruction. So always we're going to be using evidence-based practices, high leverage practices. There are some skills that don't have evidence-based practices. That's where we're going to go to, like those research-based practices. But we want to select evidence-based practices and high leverage practices, and we're going to be implementing our instruction using explicit instruction because of all of the wonderful outcomes for our students when we do. All right, we're going to be thinking about that database decision making, that database individualization. And so when I think about that database individualization, I got to make sure that I'm evaluating my students' progress, that I'm collecting data, I'm progress monitoring consistently over time. And then once I do that evaluation, I am analyzing that data. And I'm making data-based instructional decisions based on the data that I receive. So remember, this is the order in which we plan, always starting with with the standards and we work our way down. Now, there is a difference because once we get down here into the instruction, that becomes a cycle. And with that cycle, I am instructing, I am assessing and evaluating your progress. I'm looking at that data and analyzing it. And then that data is informing my instruction, doing the same thing, giving that instruction, progress monitoring, analyzing the data, and then letting that inform my instruction. All right, so again, it's got to start up there. Super important information to you and to your future as a special education teacher. So what are we going to be doing? We've already talked about the explicit instruction model with the fact that we have an opening, a body, and a closing. So what we're going to be doing this week is we're going to start by focusing on the opening. All right, so when we think about the opening and gaining students' attention, one of the ways we can do that is with attention getters. Here it is called an attention grabber. Some people call it an anticipatory set or a hook. But for this class, we're going to call it an attention getter because it's easy description. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at a video, and this video is of middle school classes, and we're going to see a whole variety of attention getters. Now, you may want to go ahead and get out a piece of paper, get something that you can record on, because as you watch this, I want you to see if you see any of the attention getters that you think you might use in your class, because I'll give you a hint. Question number one is, did you see an attention getter that you might use, and what is it? So preparing you for the question before we ever get there. All right, here we go.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say.
Bang that smile back. Go fish! Awesome. Hey, so when we are doing these corrections, you can finish these during LST or any other time. So you're going to have
Wild cats. Okay, we're going to go over the bell ringer. And let me just ask if somebody wants to come up and show.
Alright, thank you for getting quiet so quickly. Good, Robin. Alright guys, how many of you are completely finished with your text structures board?
Alright, class, all set? You bet!
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Alright, I heard something over here. You want to share what we're talking about?
Okay, mis estudiantes. Un estudiante.
So we talked about the senses. I need to talk. You need to listen. Okay, guys. So we're talking about what we did yesterday, right? So now I want you to.
Bring me down.
All right. So I want you to see how effective those were in getting students' attention. Now, a couple of things that you might notice is not everybody provided that positive reinforcement. I encourage you to do that, but it doesn't have to be something big like, way to go, I see your eyes are looking at me. There's one teacher and she literally just did this. That was what she did to her students, positively reinforcing that. Also, make sure that you are scanning because there was one, the ba-da-da-da-da-da, or however it went. The teacher began instruction. There was a student that was still talking to one of her peers. So make sure that you give that little space so that you can scan and make sure you have everyone's attention. But again, how effective were those attention getters? Really great. All right, so number one, I told you was coming. That is to write. Did you see an attention getter that you might use in your classroom? And if so, what ones or ones were they? Go ahead and stop your video and then come back and we will move on and continue talking about the opening. All right, I look forward to seeing which ones you have, especially if you added any that I haven't thought of, because we're going to collect and we're going to keep a list of these so you'll have them when you are in your own classrooms. All right, so when we're trying to gain students' attention, why are we doing that? Well, because students have to be ready to learn. They have to be mentally ready to learn. They have to be physically ready to learn. So part of gaining their attention is giving them some kind of an attention signal. You want to make sure that there are clear expectations related to gaining students' attention. You could see in each one of those little clips, the students knew exactly what was expected of them. It had been taught and it was very clear. Make sure that if you need any kind of materials or that you have those ready, because it might be that when you do that, you might have something that you hold up. I know that there is a teacher that her attention getter is that she rings a bell. Um, the other important thing is that when you are trying to get students' attention, that you're moving around the room, that you're monitoring students. Now, there was a teacher standing at the front of the room. That's okay, but you should be scanning because we want to make sure that we have everyone's attention and they're focused and ready to learn before we say a thing. Now, what these really are is you can use these as like quick behavior reminders. All right, so I said eyes on me. That is a little behavioral reminder that when I am talking, you are looking at me, or we are looking at the point of the instruction or the speaker. So I'm going to share with you teacher actions. This is what you should be doing related to all of these different components. So when it comes to the attention getter, that signal should be consistent. Again, you got to wait until all students are attending. We don't just do the attention getter and then keep on rolling. You want to reinforce those readiness skills. And I already gave you an example of that, but here's another example, and here's another attention getter. You might say, if you're listening, hold up three fingers. When students hold up three fingers, you say, I see everyone's fingers. Thank you all for listening. We're ready to learn. But again, you could just do something like, that's still positively reinforcing. And here's an example of a teacher, and I really like this photo because you can see that all students are engaged, but you can also see she's not just standing somewhere already just talking and not looking around. She is monitoring her students, she is moving throughout the classroom, and she is scanning. All right, number two, what are your key takeaways about getting students' attention? You can share with me, why is it important? How does it help instruction? What are you going to do when you're a teacher? What are your key takeaways? Stop your video, go ahead and respond, and then come on back and we'll talk about the opening some more. All right. So we've already talked about those attention getters. Now we're going to talk about the review. And there are a couple of reasons why we want to have a review. Super, super important part of your lesson. And that is because not only are we going to be assessing prerequisite skills to make sure that our students already have the knowledge and are proficient with the skills that they need for whatever we're teaching today, but we also want to make sure that we are making those connections. We're activating their prior knowledge. Because when I started talking about the opening today, I bet you were already in and connected. Your mind, your brain was making connections with the new information that I'm sharing and the information you already had. So again, doing that review, which is interactive, so that we are assessing prerequisite skills and making sure our students are good to go for the new skill we're teaching, and that we're making those connections with prior knowledge. Again, also can assess your instruction and let you know if you need to make any adjustments anywhere. So the things that you're going to include in that is you're going to talk about the prior skills. You're going to make sure that you're addressing those. You want something where the students have practice with really quick retrieval, because that's how we're going to know if our students have got it, if they're solid with it, is they are able to quickly retrieve that information. And when you're doing that review, when I say it's interactive, we want really high rates of student responding. You want students responding over and over again, because not only does that give you more information, but it helps keep them engaged. It keeps the pace moving. So again, in that review, make sure that you are giving students the opportunity to respond. And in this picture, what's so cool about it is that the student is working on the opening of an explicit instruction lesson plan, just like we're doing right now. But she's doing is she's making connections. She says, oh, you know what? In seventh grade in English language arts, we learned about strong introductions, like introductions to creative writing stories. And she's making a connection with that, with the opening. I want a really strong opening because an introduction prepares your reader for what's to come. And guess what? So does an opening. This is the beauty of AI. I created that, told it the type of image that I wanted and I wanted to say, and it created that image for me. So see, there are some positive ways in which you can use AI. All right, the next one. What do you do during the review? What is your responsibility? Where you're going to ask questions and you're going to keep it rolling. We're not going to be like sluggish because we'll lose our students. Our goal is to keep that brisk, perky pace, asking those questions, not so fast that we don't give students opportunity. You have to gauge that pace and individualize it to your class. But that's important because it helps our students stay engaged. Not only that, you want to give immediate feedback. If students are getting things correctly, we are going to positively reinforce that. Sometimes that's going to be verbal praise, but you know what? That doesn't work for everybody. Maybe it's going to be a high five. Maybe it's going to be a fist bump. You have to individualize that positive reinforcement to the student. But if students are making a mistake, we're also going to provide that error correction, that corrective feedback. And so when you're doing that review, ways that you can keep your students engaged are things like choral responses, partner responses, using whiteboards. You'll see we'll be using whiteboards a lot in our class. And then things like gestures, like give me a thumbs up if you agree, give me a thumbs down if you agree. So again, we want to make sure that we're using a variety of ways in which students can respond, and we want to give them multiple opportunities to respond and practice. Notice that there's a star up there. I may not always tell you that, so keep an eye out. Anytime you see a star, it's information I think is worth taking a screenshot of. All right, so number 3, why is it important to review previously taught skills? Go ahead, stop your video, answer that, and then we'll move on to the next part of the opening. All right, welcome back, everybody. So when you're looking at those opening tasks, those activities, we want to make sure, I'm just kind of making sure that we have this like in a really neat spot so we can see it all together, that we're doing that review. And this, sometimes students have not mastered that content. And so we want to make sure that we are reviewing that, because if they have not mastered it, we're going to have to go back and review those skills. We might have to go back and teach it. We might have to go back and use another instructional strategy or some kind of supplemental materials. But what we want to do in that review is take the content that they've already know, or that we've taught previously, and we want to connect it to today's learning. You knew this. Now here we're gonna teach this today, and these are how they are connected. Again, think about those connections and how it helps our learning. Not only that, you're doing that prerequisite check, and so students have already learned or mastered this. Then what you're going to do is still continue to make those connections. And so you're going to then determine if the students are ready for today's lesson, and you're going to be ready to move forward. Now, we typically are going to use these when there's a skill that we have already taught. If you are teaching the same thing over multiple days, you may or may not need to do that prerequisite check, but you still want to do the review. You may not use it as an assessment, but we're still activating all those things. But most often you're going to use that as a prerequisite check to even determine what did we learn yesterday, or you retain lesson from our lesson yesterday, even if the lesson is continuing. All right, let's do a quick self-check. How are you feeling about the opening so far? Haven't covered all of the components. We're going to come back and finish that out in the next video. Let me know how you're doing, and if you have any questions, make sure always, every single time, you have that question at the bottom of your participation document, and that will be part of our review. All right, I'll see you in our next video where we finish up the opening.